Uh, Good morning, panel. I'm so glad we are starting with something like money right in the morning, because that's what it's all about. If entrepreneurs don't make money, if businesses don't make money, they don't go far. Of course, Sanjay is going to talk about the social impact they create, but even that requires money to, that's what we've seen. So on that note, let's come to, so the gentlemen we have on our panel, they all have been investing in businesses. They know things from inside. They know what works, what doesn't work. So all that we're going to hear from them is going to be worth a few $1 million, if not a few $1 billion. So that's the value of things we are going to have in the next few minutes. So I think we'll get down to the deep dive of this world and maybe fish some secrets out of them. And they could be in the form of what do people look for when investing in a business, right? I would call it business. It can be any enterprise. It can be any activity, because Sanjay, in fact, what we can do is we can probably start with everyone just saying in a minute as to what they do, so that you know where they're coming from. So Ishpreet, briefly in a minute, what is it that you do in your business?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Actually, Stride Ventures is a SEBI-registered venture debt fund, category 2, which typically means that we invest in companies in the form of debt and equity both. We do have an equity component. It's a $70 million fund, which typically look at companies who are there at the nascent stages and have got some form of equity going, and they would want to scale up in the form of debt and other instruments to get the runways for them. So typically we look at companies who have started having a proof in the business model, started gaining revenues, have some traction. The track record of the team, we come from, all of us are ex-bankers, so we funded these businesses in various forms across sectors: consumer, education, healthcare. And this is what the fund will be doing. So we've just done a couple of investments recently, and we'll be agnostic, sector agnostic in terms of looking at transactions. Average ticket size of some 10 to 15 crores.
Sanjay Kadavidu, tell us what
Thank
is
you.
that you do.
So I run an organization called Action for India. We work with social entrepreneurs in India and help scale the impact of their work. Most of you in this room would be familiar with TIE. So what TIE does for general entrepreneurs globally, Action for India does for social entrepreneurs in India. And again, most people know about startups and entrepreneurs. The moment when we say social enterprise, people, their default assumption is that we're dealing with not-for-profit NGOs. Not always, not quite. We at Action for India disproportionately work with for-profit social enterprises. And we are in the process of launching an impact investment fund to make equity investments in early stage tech-enabled for-profit social enterprises. The sectors of focus are agri-tech, health tech, edu-tech. And the ticket sizes or the stage of investments are beyond the friends and family round, about 12 to 18 months before the first institutional Series A round. So the ticket size are to the tune of $250,000 to $500,000 per company in the initial round. And the one differentiator about this fund is the extent to which we are leveraging the Silicon Valley resources. Not just the capital for these initial investments coming from the Indian diaspora in the Valley, but we're tapping into the mentor networks and advisory groups in Silicon Valley, and to have them work closely with the portfolio companies in India to give them a sustainable competitive advantage.
But you've done investments in other sectors in your earlier avatar,
Yes.
media, energy, IT, yeah?
Sure. So before I started Action for India, I used to work for a family office in the US, making investments in India and the US across a variety of sectors, including education, entertainment, and so forth.
Ankur, let's hear about your business.
Hi. I'm the co-founder of Black Soil. It's basically a structured credit platform where we are investing in 3 various segments. One of them is startups, another one is real estate, and third is promoter financing. Primarily for the last 3 years, we have been very active on the startup space, and the reason we have been doing that is we're feeling this is a very emerging segment, and the current banking system obviously cannot understand these businesses, and the kind of underwriting that is required is very different. And so far, we have done close to 400 crores of disbursement only on the startup space, done more than 40 transactions. And this is something we are very excited about because the kind of businesses and the kind of quality we are seeing so far is becoming really, really interesting. And we are feeling that this space is going to explode the way it is going. And as long as the promoters sort of keep their heads down and doing execution, just not focusing on fundraising, this is going to be a very, very interesting space to watch out.
All right, so now on to the secrets. So tell us three things that you probably people in the room wouldn't know that you guys look for in any business that you would invest in. Or maybe we can start with you. Okay, we can go. All right.
So I think the first thing that happens after the first meeting or call happens, I first just have a certain gut feel about the transaction, right? Because if the gut is not, in the right place, I don't think we would like to take
That
it
is
forward.
not something the other guy can do very much
Correct.
about.
You can't. You can't. So that means the guy would have sort of stuck some chords with me. But the guy is up to something. The business is going in some places. It is something very interesting. I would like to know something more about. He sort of got me inquisitive about the business.
All right.
Without that, it is sort of, if it's like something, it's a Me Too business, then you will not be really interested about it. So he's not sort of saying something that is sort of, he knows what the investor is sort of looking for, right? So that's sort of one of the first things that we are looking for. Second, for me, the most important thing is whether this guy is actually doing dhanda, right? Whether is actually unit economics are there in place or not. Because if it's just another valuation game, we may not be really interested in it because it's more something that other kind of investors might be more open to. But if it's a real business, then finally for me, it is something that we know if it can be scaled, then there is a real something to look after.
Sanjay?
Sure. Yesterday, I was speaking to an entrepreneur, and he had been invited to the interview for the Y Combinator, which is the world's most prestigious incubator program. And what was interesting to hear him say was that, Sanjay, I've got this news. I've been invited to 4 interviews, but I've got better news. I'm about to crack 3 different customers. So this entrepreneur was an enlightened entrepreneur. He knew that the customer traction is front and center. Investment will follow. If you have a problem, that's well defined. If you've got customers who are willing to pay for your products or services, that's the key thing. So you can think all till the cows come home in terms of, hey, how do I kind of persuade an investor to give me money? But think more in terms of how do you kind of gain the customers? Have you ensured that there's a product market fit? Do you ensure that the unit economics work? And so forth. So as an investor, we look for the usual things. I mean, the passion and the drive of the entrepreneur, is the size of the market large enough, and so forth. But the number one thing, I think, in most investors' mind is in terms of what is the customer traction, what is the potential for continuing to kind of be an indispensable source of products or services to your customers.
All right. So you stayed with 1. That's all right. No, that's fine. Okay. I think Ishpreet, you can do 1 to 3, any number.
Yeah, actually, both of them had valid inputs in terms of what you look forward to in a company. But practically, the real sense of attraction of a startup comes from a perspective of an execution. So while we say a team and a market and a business idea, what we have realized in terms of our experience, that sometimes ideas are cheap and execution is the key, right? So irrespective, you're catering to a very large market, as rightly pointed out by both of them, and founders being great. Sometimes they get swayed away or carried away in terms of other loose aspects and not concentrating as a CEO or running the business the way they have visioned it for. So that's important, and because we are venture debt, for us, how the equity money is getting deployed, what's the traction on the equity side also plays a significant role, because equity is very important and integral. And has a reasonably high value versus any other instrument, and debt can only support to a certain extent. So not numbering in 1, 2, 3, but basically these aspects of how the company is getting executed, and that's what we believed the companies who have done well has typically done well because the execution has been flawless, is very important for us.
Just to add to the list, Sunil, as a general investor, there are basically 2 elements in the equation. There is the risk, there is the reward. As an impact investor, there's a 3rd element that enters into the equation, and this is the impact. What kind of impact are you creating with your businesses? What the number of new jobs created, the increase in the income levels, the reduction in the healthcare vulnerabilities, and so forth. So that's another factor. As an impact investor, how rigorously do you track these impact metrics, and what systems and infrastructure do you have in place that when things get hard, when the rubber meets the road, that you're not swayed too much by the financial returns, but you still have your eyes on the social impact that you generate.
Yes, and just to add, actually, the reason why you'll see some business really getting succeed and probably see the right kind of traction and the attention, it's just the matter in which they have fought the hard times and how they have overcome those hard times. So it might be, we might say, complementing an equity raise, but that equity raise also happens because of the perspective of that founder, the investors being committal or at least sure of the fact that this founder will go through that time and has the power to come back. So it all circumvents around that aspect of probably fighting the hard times and being flawless in the execution.
Anything that they shouldn't be doing, anything they shouldn't be talking about or should not be sharing with you, or they shouldn't be doing at all in the business that you think is going to go against them? Because, you know, there are a large number of founders here in the hall, and, you know, the mistakes they shouldn't be making, let me put it this way. If you today help them, maybe that will change their life. Anyone? We can start with you, Ankur.
So I think fundraising is a complete balancing act. There are so many things that they have to do correct to get to land funding, right? And maybe even not just funding, even the entire entrepreneurship journey that they have to go through, starting from getting the seed angel capital to the entire fact, there are a lot of things they have to go through. So there'll always be things that they might trip upon, but there are some things that you cannot like at all do. For example, suppose we had that first meeting, my gut said, you know, let's take it forward. I asked for some data and that guy takes 3 weeks to share some data, right? So that means you're not prepared because you need to know what the guy is going to be looking for. So if your house is not in order, that is not interesting. Second, for example, we may just get into a little bit more detail into the business. For example, we get into the balance sheet of the business. A lot of these guys are focused on the P&L. But the real state of the affairs of a business you come to know from the balance sheet. Now, if the founder does not know what the state of affairs are, that also becomes a very red flag because that means he's sort of running a different kind of race. So if somebody knows all these smaller minor aspects of the business and is on top of it, that gives a lot of comfort to the investor that, you know, we are sort of partnering with somebody who is on the right track.
Got it. Sanjay?
And again,
Not to do.
I don't think I'm speaking alone. I'm probably speaking for the entire panel here. Yes, competency matter. Yes, skill sets matter. Yes, passion matters. But integrity, I think, matters above all. So your projections can be rosy, but you cannot afford to kind of dilly-dally with respect to the facts, with respect to the integrity that you bring to the information that you share with investors. Because you don't get a second chance on that particular aspect. There's second chance in lots of other things. So that's one thing that I'd highly caution you in terms
You
of.
must have integrity, is that what you're saying? Fantastic.
I think just to add, transparency in this space is super important, right? Because even if you've gone through some ups and downs, it's good to share that experience because if you've gone through that down, as you just had pointed out earlier, that if you know how you got through that phase specifically out of that, because you would have applied some startup nature, which is basically your frugality would have come into place. You would have done some kind of jugaad maybe possibly to sort of come out of it, and that sort of got your business model correct, right? So those things are very important. A business cannot just go through one direction. It has to go through ups and downs, and how you work during the downtime sort of really gives a good impact about the resilience of the promoter.
Look, Sunil, I
Things
think
not
the
to
question,
do,
the question is that what they should share and what they should not. I think, as he rightly mentioned, the process from the identification of a company till you really get started with them, and from there on in, the real process starts. Any time when you feel uncomfortable with the promoter, right, in any form, it really sets you back. And that's what we've seen as our lending experience, because once you start getting traction with the company, it's ideally a 2 months process, and anything which you come to know, whether it's balance sheet, what Ankur mentioned, or any other aspects which they've stated in the meetings which comes out flawed, really is a turn off. And especially from investor perspective as well, because you've committed for another 2-3 years at least, if not more. Any aspect which is more of a hidden aspect comes around, or something which they should have shown transparently. So I don't think I agree on the perspective what they should not. Right. Yes, probably they can be a little cagey of the perspective of having more term sheets and negotiating well. That's also very important because of the perspective that you want to have the best for the business, avoid dilutions early, and all that factors play well. So probably being smart enough to manage various term sheets is something which they can do from their perspective. But I think it should be, as they rightly said, there should be a very flawless, transparent mechanism, because anytime when you get turn off in terms of any matter, any particular aspect is a deterrent in terms of a relationship.
And I'd just like to add something exactly opposite. So he has multiple term sheets, and if the guy comes to me when he has no runway left, that is also a problem. That means you are sort of completely not under emergency, right? Because when you're coming for fundraise, you should have enough runway with you so that you're able to negotiate from a position of strength, not a weakness, right? Because unless it's something very exciting, the investor will not obviously want to take that risk. So it's very important that you time your fundraise very, very critically. And if you're coming at the time when it is completely emergency, then it's too late.
I was hoping to hear things like, do not argue with the VC, do not send him too many emails. No, I'm joking, of course. That, you know,
You should argue, I believe.
you know, or do not call him more than once a
Actually,
week.
VCs do not let you breathe any which ways. So they'll ensure that you're on your toes, or at least the monitoring, the fortnight monitoring and the aspects really ensure that they're on top of their game. That's why, unfortunately, we would have seen certain incidents which has called for certain aspects, but at least I think that's extreme. There are a lot of VCs who make you very comfortable, who want to partner with you not in financial perspective, but in strategic perspective as well, ensuring that you grow well. But yes, I think their game is to make sure that they make returns, right?
How
So-
much chasing is okay? Can they chase you like once a week? Can you give you a call or a mail or a WhatsApp message once a week? Ishpreet, mere kya ho raha hai proposal ka? Is it on? Is it not on?
Yeah, if you really want that proposal to be done, I think it can be vice versa also, to be honest. So we have been after some promoters to take the funding also. So I think it's mutual. So I think after a particular point of time, after 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months of interaction, you settle at a sweet spot when you know about the founder well and how the interaction is going. So that gets dynamically played out, and it's mutual. As you say, that if you really like a company and naturally you have liked this company, that's why you funded them. It's a give and take.
Ankur, you were going to say something when I butted in.
No problem. So I think it's very important that we should not burn bridges with any of the VC guys. I believe that even if your meeting went quite horrible and the guy didn't really understand what you were up to, but the world is so small, it's good to sort of be always end on a good note and always take some inputs, because some of those inputs you may not understand that point of time were relevant, but as you go along that journey, you may realize, okay, that was actually critical what he was positioning, sort of telling me, because they have seen so many businesses, they have seen what kinds of ups and downs and go. You might be in the same thing that they have seen in the past, and you might sort of take it a little bit, you know, that this guy did just spend 15 minutes with me and just gave me some idea, but that 15 minutes might be because that guy has spent like 15, 20 years in the experience, and he can give you that feedback quite quickly.
And in addition, it's not about the frequency of pinging the VC. It's in terms of what developments and updates do you have? Do you have a customer traction? Do you have a partner engagement? And more than you yourself reaching out to the VC, if you're really serious about a VC relationship, get your board member or get a customer to say that, hey, we are really, this product has been of tremendous value. So there are multiple ways to engage with the VCs, not directly pinging them just on one aspect.
And what's more important to you, the business or the people who have founded the business? Yeah, Ishpreet?
I think I just started with a quote. For me, execution is more important, particularly. Yeah, because of the fact that businesses, in terms of ideas, there's a lot of disruption within, and very, very fine line of difference within certain businesses. It's just the matter of that perception and the way the people have really pictured this business as, and how they have executed that idea of theirs. So I think for us, it would be founders over and above the business model.
Again, I don't think there is a right and wrong answer to this.
All right, sure.
But again, at my organization, I think the bias is heavily towards the people, the founder. In an entrepreneurial venture, without the vision, without the power, the passion of the entrepreneur, he can withstand many kind of turbulence in the external environment. Obviously, you can't kind of be in a tiny market space and then expect a stupendous founder to do magic. The basic, all of the things being equal, I think the founder is key.
Founder does matter, yeah? Ankur?
I think I have to agree with my colleagues, like, that we have to look at the founder first, because a call is on that person, right? Because if the guy obviously is in the right direction, businesses can go through ups and downs, right? But if he knows what he's up to and you have taken the right partner, you will sort of come out through this. So that's why you have seen so many times, you keep reading in the newspaper that the companies keep raising from the same existing investor follow-on rounds. That is because they are feeling either the business, of course, the business has to be doing decently well, but they know the founder is doing something well. But of course, after a certain stage, company may reach a certain stage where the founder may not do justice to the business. That is also something recently is very famous what's happening. But that's a very different stage. We're right now talking about more early stage. So for us, the founders is something very critical, right? So it is not the middle management, it is not the business model. Finally, it's the founder what he sort of is bringing on the table.
In terms of sectors, now one keeps hearing all sorts of things about this sector is doing well, days of this are over, this is going to happen, watch out the next 10 years or 1 year, 3 years, 10 years, there's nothing in like 10 years in your business. But yeah, what is it that's, let's say, hot in the next 1 year perspective, 2020, what's going to be hot?
I'm not sure the prediction in terms of hot, but definitely what's in is more seasoned founders coming into the businesses. So they come with a very typical vintage of running some businesses, and that experience really plays a factor. I think that's what started getting recognized more from a perspective of that they've seen the market, they have the experience, they have the clients, and they want to execute something of their own. Always plays a factor, and I think that's what actively the VC community is now looking at. So having said that, it's not that it's a deterrent for young founders not to come in, but just that have started getting respected more is definitely in. And from that perspective, I think another thing which adds on is more of revenue visibility and profitability is getting aligned. Again, a very large phenomena, but very, very deep discounting models have been starting getting discounting to a certain extent. So you want to see traction of the business in terms of the revenues flowing in, and hence the profitability. And that can be sector agnostic, according to me. Till the time these two large boxes are ticked in, you can revolve your businesses around this.
You wouldn't risk mentioning a few sectors.
I think overall seeing the venture debt space and the venture capital space, we've seen a lot of traction recently in the consumer brands creation. There are a lot of specific funds who have come in who want to focus on consumer play. Because when you're talking about a population of India of 130 crores and beyond, you know that there are certain brands which can get in-house represented very well. So there are brands like Boat, who has made an electronic form themselves presence. There are a lot of consumer brands who have come in from the likes of Raw Pressery and other consumable brands. Licious have got originated out of India. So consumer play in terms of interface has seen a lot of traction. Also, if you talk about segments, healthcare and agriculture are the two agtech, though they have been around, it's not that they're nascent or recent. But from that perspective, the underpenetration still remains. So if some innovation is happening there, it always has takers, according to me.
Sanjay, would you like to?
Again, I'm not going to venture into kind of making projections in terms of what is hot or make any prediction there. There are, in the impact space in India, about a half a dozen to dozen active impact investment funds. And when we decided to kind of join this group, we didn't want to be a Me Too fund. And as I mentioned earlier, our key differentiation is in terms of to the extent that we are trying to tap into the Silicon Valley networks to engage with this fund, not just from a funding standpoint, but in terms of the technology inputs and so forth. So the three sectors that I mentioned, agri-tech, edu-tech, health tech, those sectors have been chosen because how they lend themselves to these inputs, be it of the technology elements, the big data, the analytics, the AI, the ML. And these elements are much more likely to be integrated into agriculture, education, healthcare. And we thought that there was an opportunity for the Indian diaspora in Silicon Valley to not just make the capital available for the scaling journeys of these enterprises here, but yeah, through their technology expertise and through their company building skills in the Valley, when they're trying to address global markets, that expertise could stand in good stead for the portfolio companies in India to give them a sustainable competitive advantage. And that's the reason why we are focusing on those three elements. These are by no means, I would say, that the in thing for the next little while.
Ankur, what would you place your bet on?
So no, bet we can place in India. I think you can place bet on anything right
good.
now. That is not the point. But I think 2-3 things have started emerging sort of a lot. One is the B2B side certainly has seen a lot of traction. B2B has been so far not been the very exciting segment, but certainly for the last 1 year or so, B2B has sort of caught up the eye of the investors because they realize that this is also a very fragmented market. And anyone who can sort of bring the demand on that platform, supply is always there because of the fragmentation. So that itself is a very big segment that sort of we have been focusing personally on, and that is something we are seeing a lot of equity investors sort of going behind because the SME segment we talk about, it's completely running without any kind of digital sort of help. And whether you put an angle of fintech on that or not, but there is enough to be done with that segment itself, which is sort of where we are looking the economy to go to the $5 trillion. We want that segment to sort of perform, right? So the demand and the supply matching platforms, which are focusing on the B2B side, are very exciting. The other one, if I go on the B2C side, the social commerce has become very interesting because that is one segment that people are realizing is again small angle on B2B side again in that, but that is again specialized commerce. So we cannot obviously compete with Flipkarts and Amazons of the world. So then what do we create which is so different, which is not available currently in the market, and how do we sort of tap that suppliers and try and bring them on the platform?
Got it. Now, before we will have questions, you can think of your questions, but I do want to ask, you know, I just learned this term this morning called NT portfolio. So I would really like to know, Ankur, starting with you, your NT portfolio.
There's
Something
quite a
you would
f-
have invested in.
We couldn't invest in.
Couldn't, or maybe you just think ideal, if wish I had known it, like it happened 3 years ago, but you thought, just the thing I would
No,
have
no,
invested in.
We
Yeah.
have actually gone through situations where we've not been able to close transactions for multiple reasons because sometimes being the debt guys, we are very sort of focused on our
Are
covenants.
you
and
okay to name some of them?
Yeah, so we couldn't close with Dunzo recently. It was in the market 1 year back, so we couldn't do it because of certain requirements.
You think they're brilliant?
I personally really like the company and the founders and what they are doing, though they are sort of competing with the biggies like Swiggy's and all. But I really feel that is something that they're trying to do very different. That was one. Second, when we started off very early, we were still novice, and I think we're still novice, but we are like completely novice in that phase. And that time a transaction called Cashify had come. It's quite done very well since then. That time it was just raise and angel money, and after that they sort of raised another 3 rounds of equity money. And we couldn't just sort of start with like a couple of crores of debt at that point of time because it was very difficult for us to understand because still in 2016, it was still a very early stage concept.
All right, Sanjay, your
At Action for India, prior to the current launch of this impact fund, we've been in the ecosystem for the last 7. Yeah, we've been in the ecosystem for the last 7 years, and we've had a similar competition focused on the impact space where we identify the top 5 social entrepreneurs and take them to Silicon Valley for a couple of weeks and facilitate interactions with them there. So some of the earlier entrepreneurs in 2016, one of the entrepreneurs was Shashank Kumar with the company DHeart, Green Ag Revolution. He works with farmers in Bihar, Jharkhand, and Odisha, and provides customized crop advisory services through a technology platform. Just in the last 6 months, he's raised about 30 crores of equity, 20 crores of debt, and in the next 60 days, he's planning to do a larger round of impact funding. So these are entrepreneurs that we had identified in the early stages, but we didn't have the wherewithal to kind of fund them there. Now with this current fund, we'd be able to kind of participate in those kind of things. So that's one example.
Explain your kind of examples of, the right businesses to invest in. I couldn't because I didn't know, or we don't do that kind of fund, but still you think,
Yeah. It's interesting, Sunil, because I was leading the banks vertical for venture debt, and this is in 2017. We recently closed 2 transactions, and for a bank, it's very different to do venture debt, right? That time, so I met. Happy to share, I met Byju's in Leela, and he was looking at a debt perspective, and we really wanted. We liked the business model, but we thought the valuations have already creeped up. So that remains a typical anti-portfolio from a perspective of not giving a debt that time, because that time also they were a little early where they are right now. I think they were Series B or something. But yes, there are numerous examples like that. Luckily, from our perspective, what we have learned from that experience is, as Ankur mentioned, we are not very hell-bent on a lot of covenants when we have really sure that we want to do the transaction. So if we, as we said, that we like the founders and we take a venture capital call, to a certain extent, the covenants can be managed. So we trying to gain from our experience, I'm sure Ankur will as well, that we would not let go of our transactions when we really like certain things and certain covenants can be taken care of. Yeah.
All right. At this point, any questions from the audience? Are very welcome, maybe 1 or 2.
Hello. Yeah, hi. My name is Varun. I represent a company called Urchalo. I have a question which I've always found interesting, but probably didn't have opportunity to ask the right audience. So the question I have is really related to organizations that are already highly profitable. They are small in terms of scale, but we are already profitable and decently profitable. For those organizations, it becomes a key question about how and why investment rounds or going to investors, become relevant. And the different or the challenge that we face personally is, coming from a bootstrap background, it becomes a kind of culture in the organization in terms of how you look at scale over a period of time. Now, when we interact or when we look at interacting with investors, what are the key differences or changes that you would recommend in terms of the mindset of the organizations to actually be looking at scale at a faster pace? Because that's the primary motive, I believe, for the organizations to move towards the
Thank you.
investment
Yeah.
round. Yeah?
Yeah, anyone, yeah. Because I presume it's for any of the panelists, right?
Yeah, so one perspective here is that, again, to be investable, yeah, profitability is, okay, one dimension, but the initial important dimension is in terms of the potential for scale, the potential for outsized financial returns for the investors. So profitability is not the be-all and the end-all. The potential for scale is much more important, and if you can convince the investor in terms of the traction that you're receiving, the pace at which you're growing, I think that becomes much more important.
I just to add, basically, VCs look at two types of businesses. They're either investable, as he said, or not investable. The non-investable generally are, they sometimes call it lifestyle businesses, which means that it is good for you to have that business because you can maybe grow it 30-40% year on year, but it will maybe reach a number of maybe like 40-50 crores revenue, which is good to have as a lifestyle personal promoter. But for a VC, he's looking for a very different kind of scale. So that scale is not achievable for him for whatever reason the business is going through. He may not be interested. Even if you're profitable, you may be sort of having like maybe 30% EBITDA margin also. But if you think this is not going to grow at the level that he's looking for, because they are always in the lookout for the next, unicorn, that is the reason that they're sort of doing this business. So even though your business might be interesting, but the fact is that it is not necessarily investable in their sort of scheme of things. It doesn't necessarily mean your business is not good.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I think they covered it. There's this perspective of a profitable business raising funds, right? I think, personally speaking, if you're confident on your business, that's the best scenario to be in, because you're not externally dependent in terms of raising funds. Having said that, the scale can be achieved in various forms. So that typically profitable businesses comes and debt investors are very keen looking at those businesses because of the perspective of being more assured of the repayments, right? Because your profitability will take care of that. And that's one way of looking at scale from that perspective of not equity. And then when debt can give you some form of scale, can equity follow? But that goes again around to what Ankur said, the business has to be investable from an investor perspective.
One quick point, yeah.
One quick point. So even in Silicon Valley, billion-dollar valuation technology companies have been built without raising a single dollar of venture funding. Zoho comes to mind. So I think I'd encourage you to think in terms of, for what reason do you want to kind of attract the venture funding to begin with?
You know, I just got this note that we don't have time for more, but these gentlemen are going to be there. Can you please take it offline? So I think
just
at
have
this
a very
stage,
specific, very small question.
Okay, very small then, yeah,
So,
okay, 30 seconds.
I represent Hatek Solar. We put up rooftop solar projects across India. We're among the top 10 in India. My specific question is that the problem in India, out of 130 crore people, there are still about 30 crore people with the grid has not reached, right? Why aren't there so many investments happening in this sector in terms of clean energy in the residential segment, which is a massive segment? So that's my question.
Yeah, I'll try taking this up. I've funded some of the solar companies. Actually, the problem lies in terms of the tariff levels, especially talking about solar, but that's more at commercial. Rooftop solar, I think you rightly said, is underpenetrated. And I know of investors who are looking to invest in them. So I'm not sure it's totally out. I think it requires some very, very specific audience to be addressed to. The commercial VC investors would not invest because of the perspective of their way of looking at these businesses are entirely of different scale or different vision. But if you talk about probably like more of a social investors and rooftop solar being underpenetrated, I think you can have takers there for sure on both equity and debt side.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ishpreet. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Ankur. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being there with us. Thank you.